Great. Well, welcome. Welcome to you. Glad we're all together. And we're delighted to be with Anne Beffel, who is Associate Professor of Art and Design at the College of Visual and Performing Arts at Syracuse University. The presentation will be about 30 minutes long, and we'll allow the time at the end for questions and comments. So Anne, a little bit about Anne Beffel. She's a publicly engaged artist, which is someone who puts art in public places rather than galleries. And she's interested in creating opportunities for empathetic exchanges through her art. Her exhibitions have included public arts residencies at the World Financial Center and the New York Downtown Hospital in Lower Manhattan. And these are now documented on the web through links on her Syracuse webpage. And I recommend exploring. They're just wonderfully whimsical and very moving. Like many of our webinar faculty, Anne is one of the Center's Contemplative Practice Fellows. And as a fellow, she created the course Contemplative Arts and Society at Syracuse to explore the intersection of art, contemplative practice, and social psychology. In this webinar, she'll discuss something of the course and her students' experiences with a number of art practices in preparation for designing their own daily practices, which they documented using media arts. As part of the course, her students also participated in community-engaged video workshops with City High School students. And I know Anne has prepared a lot of video and audio which may be disabled during this presentation, but we'll be able to see some images and hear from her about her work. Thanks so much for sharing this with us, Anne. And now I'll turn the webinar over to you.
And thank you for the introduction. Not sure what the technical difficulties have been, but we'll move forward as we are able. So you may see some question marks where some of the media is not showing up or connected due to switching computers here to troubleshoot. The benefits of the fellowship that I received in 2008 really started to accrue long before I even applied. When the first call for applications came out, I had just begun my teaching career. And so I printed out the request for applications and put it up on my office wall. And during the 5 years when I was ramping up to tenure, I would look at it, and it provided a kind of beacon or a light. And I think that the Center and the Association do that for many of us here today, those of us who are familiar with it. So I'm really grateful. What I'm going to do with my talk today is I'm going to begin by focusing on a project, a contemplative video project called the Sitting Still Contemplative Video Project, which is one component of the course Contemplative Arts and Society. And then I'll branch out to talk about other course components. Okay, good. So the course, this journey really began, and I'm going to go back to this slide here, when I was in graduate school at University of Iowa. And I'm really grateful to the professors there and the people who ran the curriculum, because they were flexible enough to really trust that I would find my path. So after 2 years of being very disciplined and painting in the studio, I felt like I had reached a fork in the road, that I needed to either continue painting indoors or I needed to change my practice completely in order to spend time outdoors in a contemplative fashion. And so I began walking outdoors, and I'm really grateful that the professors trusted me to find my path and start where I was. Start where you are is some of my favorite wisdom from the Buddhist monk Pema Chodron. Start where you are. So over the course of walking for years, I began to see the world, I think, from what I call a nonviolent point of view. And I wondered what I could do and how I could encourage other people to consider this question of what the world looks like from a nonviolent point of view. I really believe that the arts, particularly image when combined with sound and narrative or poetry, has a lot of power to engender extraordinary attention, to borrow a phrase from the Harry Csikszentmihalyi. And so I began to wonder how video cameras could become tools for paying extraordinary attention, which is not necessarily the first thing that I think people think of when they consider video cameras. So this is a still from a video that is an example of the Sitting Still video project. And I'm sure we can make links available to you to the live video at another time. What I did was I invited artists from the North and the South, as well as from Syracuse University and the city of Syracuse, to join me in exploring this question of nonviolent points of view by means of contemplative video. So in preparation for taping, each videographer counted his or her breath as an object of focus and then began creating video from a perfectly still point of view. The choice of subject matter for the artists on the left was completely open. The artists on the right used the first artist, the artist that you see on the left, their videos as points of inspiration to create response videos. And then the videos are juxtaposed into a single work of art. So what you would see if this were moving is a frog that its throat sort of puffing out very, very quickly in this very sort of panicky rhythm. And then the artist on the right shaking a water bottle in conjunction with that rhythm. Oops, sorry, my computer's a little slow. So we hope that the nonviolent, the contemplative video project will help people see the world from a nonviolent point of view and share each other's points of view to the extent possible, step into one another's shoes, notice differences in what they see, and get to know each other as multidimensional human beings, which is important to avoid stereotyping. So why do we blindfold people? I'll get back to that. This is part of one of the contemplative video workshops. But first, we'll look at the process. So to discover a non-point of view, we focus on three areas. I'm very interested in the confluence of three specific ways of knowing and being. One is environmental appreciation or attunement with our surroundings. Another is rapport that supports empathy and nonviolence. This is a drawing exercise. You can see that I haven't completely abandoned painting and drawing. And it's creativity that I'm interested in both individually and collaboratively. So there are several different workshop formats. In fact, if I were to draw out a map, and I have, of all of the components of the project and the different ways that we've manifested it, it looks a little bit like an air traffic control diagram. So here's a brief summary of some of the different workshop formats that we've used. And I think one of the things that's made it possible to offer these workshops in many different contexts is being very flexible in the different formats that we offer. So the next experiment that we're going to offer will be a contemplative video workshop through the public performance art group City Meditation Group. So this is a public art performance group that performed in New York last fall, and you can see in the lower right a drawing of how these contemplatives who meditate in public will offer the video cameras to passersby and encourage them to make contemplative videos as part of the Art Sparks public art performance in Seattle. Before we look at some of the images of the exhibitions and some mock-ups of the website that we plan to launch, I'd like to go into a little more detail about the experience of shooting video. What you see here is an online book page from a catalog from the University of Memphis Museum of Art exhibition. Amanda Carver grew up very near the site of the hate crime against Emmett Till, and she decided to use this project as an opportunity to go back home and bear witness to that site and how it has changed. And so she simply set her video camera down to bear witness to that. I chose that video as one that I wanted to respond to because in Harlem, I live about a mile from the site where Malcolm X was assassinated. As I was packing my things one night to get ready to videotape that site as part of this contemplative video project, onto my computer screen came Barack Obama, who had just won his first primary. And so I set my video camera down in front of my screen. It was on manual focus. I just turned it on, and slowly Barack Obama's image came into focus. And I knew then that that was the response video that I wanted to make. So here's a slide of the first exhibition at the University of Memphis Museum of Art. And this is a project that is very much indebted to several people, Lisa Abbott's, Leslie Lubers, and Cedar Nordby. And what you see here in the main gallery is the contemplative video juxtaposed, the two videos juxtaposed in a split screen format on the wall. You'll also notice several stools, and in the right-hand corner you see a kind of blue gallery. So the stools were part of a design build exhibition by the School of Architecture students at U of M. They made the stools completely out of cardboard. They were really sturdy, and I think they did a very nice job on them. And then the gallery in the back is what we called the archive room. And this was designed by U of M Art Foundation faculty member Cedar Nordby and his students, and they implemented it as well. They began with a concept of book pages that I provided to them and came up with this graphic that you see on the wall that represents the notion of confluences. And I think they used both images of rivers and bodies of water as well as images of the brain to develop this graphic. Each student who participated wrote a few words about their video, and then we posted their images as well, so that there was a reference between who was making the videos and what people were seeing projected in the main gallery. This is our second exhibition. It's at the Everson Museum of Art in Syracuse, New York, and it's under the direction of Curator of Education Pam McLaughlin. And you see the video, which alternated. Occasionally we would put a full screen video in there to avoid visual fatigue, actually, and you also see the archive wall in this instance. And here are images of a couple of the participants in Syracuse. We also did a video of a radio interview at Red House Art Radio, and this is one of the clips that we'll see if this new computer can make it up here. No. What you would hear is you would hear Asha and Jade and Sanjeev and Taylor, along with their teacher, Cheryl Molesky, who teaches at the Central Tech High School in Syracuse, talk about what this project did for them. Some of the things that they point out include noticing things downtown in a city that they thought was just a regular, quote-unquote, ugly old city, but then they realized was a city that had art and beauty and nature, and that there were things that they noticed that they never would have noticed unless they had gone through looking at it in this way through these video cameras. And then Cheryl talks about how even though we didn't talk about nonviolence in the workshops, that all of the experiences that we go through in the workshop, and then she lists some of them, eating a raisin, which some of you are familiar with John Kabat-Zinn's eating a raisin exercise, drawing together, listening to each other carefully, talking about our videos and critique, and looking at each other's videos, that these are ways that we can be in the present, and even though we're not thinking about nonviolence per se, they're alternatives to violence. And that was really nice to hear because the workshops are not particularly didactic. We really don't address nonviolence head on. For the most part, we simply create an environment where people can slow down, connect with their environments, connect with each other, develop rapport, share their creativity, and I think develop even compassion in some sense. So here's a quote from one of the blogs of one of the Syracuse University students who participated in the workshops. She writes, "Students of different ages, lifestyles, and cultures and upbringings were able to get along and relate through 2-minute video segments. The workshop revolved around this interesting openness of each and every participant through the films that we made. I think that the films broke down the boundaries that make us uncomfortable working with new people. The videos we made were personal extensions of ourselves, our lives, and our environments, and we were then able to let others into that bubble and participate in it." So we want to extend this project globally, and the way that we're doing that is I've joined forces with the School of Information Studies, the iSchool, at Syracuse University. And what you see here pictured is a small portion of our team that's been meeting for the last couple of years. This is Susan Deschave, who's a professor who has worked to help us help the students in the iSchool, not I, design a back-end database. And you also see my little dog, Letta, in my lap. We're also working with a graphic design team called Napkin in New York City who are designing the graphic interface for this. So this is a mock-up of the homepage, and these little rectangles represent different contemplative videos. And when you click on them, you see on the left the call video, the original video, and then videos that are made in response on the right. And I think one of the things that's kept this team together, including the iSchool students and the art and design students who have also joined the team, is a sense that they're working on a quote-unquote real-world project that's linked to a number of things that we all believe in, including contemplative practice, the power of technology, the capacities of art, inclusiveness, and an intention of nonviolence. So the website is how we hope to go global, but really this contemplative video project is only one component of the semester-long Contemplative Arts and Society course. So in this course, what we hope is that students will begin to understand different perspectives on contemplative practice. The course centers around the intersection of 3 specific areas: art with emphasis on publicly or community-engaged art, Buddhist influence on creative and perceptual thought in the U.S., and social psychology, including rapport and well-being. And I'm not an expert on Buddhist studies or social psychology, but it's been quite wonderful to be able to draw from those areas as points of inspiration and to inform the practices and the art projects that we work on. We meet in a large room. It has great AV capacity. It's wired. It has flexible space and movable furniture so we can do yoga and sit in a circle. These are the aspirations of the students who are attracted to the course. And we explore these aspirations in relation to art society, specifically the community that we develop in our course, and then the community we develop with those that we collaborate with, and then contemplative practice. Art and design students with these interests readily embrace the idea of connectedness in the sense that they understand it influences both processes such as brainstorming and critique, and the outcomes of their design and art processes. So rapport, attunement, and empathy do not appear to be luxuries to art and design students. They understand that they're really essential to our livelihoods. So the integral links among perceptual abilities such as attentional focus and open awareness really fuel students' commitments to rigorous exercises that require close observation, experimentation, and attunement. What I don't do is I don't focus on teaching students to become good meditators. I hope to give them some vocabulary for learning to be more present. I hope that they'll become more familiar with a number of ideas about how their abilities to pay attention and open their awareness may be cultivated. So how do we do this? The curriculum follows a carefully considered sequence. It begins with our individual experiences, And that involves students paying careful attention to mundane gestures and everyday activities. And then subsequently, through our creative art projects that are contemplative and collaborative in nature, we radiate our attention and awareness outward to develop attunement with our environment. And also through the sharing of both individual artworks as well as collaborative processes, students develop an environment where there are conditions for attunement, for empathy, shared creativity, and even compassion. And I don't think this is too surprising given the research that's available to us. Daniel Goleman points out in his book, Social Intelligence, simply paying attention allows us to build emotional connection. Lacking attention, empathy hasn't a chance. Lacking attention, empathy hasn't a chance. So there are 4 curriculum strands that have survived testing through 3 semesters of the course. Narratives and theories of contemplatives. This is really where students get to see and hear in the words and the works of contemplatives the links among creativity, perceptual abilities, contemplative practices, well-being, and rapport with others. So these are some of the AV and live resources that we use. And here are 3 texts that students have responded very enthusiastically to. And we also do a lot of contemplative exercises. This might explain a little bit about why art students in visual arts classes are walking around blindfolded. This is a walking blindfolded activity that Alexandra Fust, the young woman in the red shirt ringing meditation bells in the background, developed based on a camp experience. And she's led it for 3 semesters and also out in the community. And the contemplative exercises really allow students to test and question the theories that they're reading and hearing about. And I really can't emphasize too much how important that questioning and testing is for the students. And also I think for other students who are not in the class and other professors and administrators who are really curious about this class and this contemplative orientation toward education. And I have to thank Kathy Biddick at Temple University for suggesting that students are brilliant at developing and leading contemplative exercises. She was totally right. So an example of a found contemplative exercise comes from this book, Right Listening by Mark Grady. He has a number of little listening exercises that are very simple. Students would choose from among them and then test them out in their daily lives and report back. And here's a quote from one of the students as she writes in her blog about the results of her experiments with close listening. First semester I had roommate issues, and as a result I ended up moving into a single. If I could go back and relive this experience, I would handle the situation differently. Looking back, I realized that our differences were largely due to a lack of listening on both ends. If I had taken the time to sit and intently listen to how she was feeling about the rooming situation, I think we could have worked through it together instead of feeling like the only solution was to separate. And she continues, when I did the exercise on patience, it really allowed me to step back and notice how I form opinions before people are even finished talking. When I really listen to a person, I'm able to be present from moment to moment and also develop empathy towards them because I've become more invested in their point of view, which is really wonderful to see echoed through these various exercises over and over again. So an example of an exercise that I developed to help students interpret a reading is called frame-by-frame video. And frame-by-frame video was in conjunction with a chapter from the book called The Joy of Living, Unlocking the Secret and Science of Happiness by Yongey Mingyur Rinpoche, in which he describes how the human brain perceives the world in terms of frames. And what I would share with you normally at this point is an example of that video. You would see a video of a student who taped himself doing the dishes. And in his blog, he writes about the experience of then re-watching himself washing the dishes, but scrolling through the video literally picture by picture or frame by frame, and how this experience really helped him understand what it means to slow down and be present from tiny little moment to tiny little moment. Because actually, when you talk to students about paying attention breath by breath, for instance, a breath is a lot of time, especially if it's a long sigh. And so this exercise of watching themselves tie their shoes or do the dishes or brush or braid their hair frame by frame gives them a point of reference for what it means to really, really slow down. So the next curriculum strand is daily practice. And designing a daily practice raises a lot of questions for students among the differences among contemplation or meditation and things like rumination and obsession. And for art students in particular, they have a history of artists that they look up to who represent forms of currency in the art world who practiced a lot of obsessive thinking or rumination. And I think this reinforces a lot of culturally held myths about artists. I think the course has been somewhat popular among art students and design students because they're looking for alternatives to these stereotypes about obsessive artists who ruminate. And yet many students still are interested in following in the tradition of the surrealists, for instance, who follow their stream of consciousness, which stream of consciousness, does not always lead to equanimity. It doesn't necessarily involve rumination either. But one thing that it usually does is it provides a lot of creative material. So we talk about the relationship to this material that's generated by our thought streams. And we gently probe and try to get to together characterize the differences among rumination and meditation and obsessiveness. And because many of the art students are very perfectionistic and hard on themselves, I really stress Chodron's wisdom of being unconditionally friendly to oneself, even in the face of what may seem like a failure. And I think that some of these conversations are the most valuable to students. So the daily practices among the students are as diverse as they are. They work intuitively to develop a practice as they pay attention to things that they do on a daily basis. And they try to open their awareness to some aspect of their daily life that they want to explore repeatedly over and over again and then again. Because a semester is a long time to pursue a daily practice. And the trick here has been to provide students with enough structure so that they don't completely flounder in designing a daily practice, but enough openness so that they can start where they are. So this is an image of one of my students, Grace Harity, doing walking meditation that she took. And she took the course Contemplative Arts and Society with the idea that she would overcome procrastination, which she linked to pretty extreme perfectionism. She has a fairly active inner critic. I think I understand Grace pretty well. We have a certain amount in common. Grace's daily practice consisted of, well, I'll read to you from her blog. She says, "My daily practice has similarities to walking meditation, except with paint." And what you would see here is her demonstrating her painting. She made a little stop animation for her blog. She says, "Rather than focusing on the motion of the step of my feet, I focus on the movement of my brush as I paint with water." So she uses only water, painting back and forth on a small piece of wood. "It allows me to solely focus on the relaxing repetition of painting without judging or worrying about the outcome of the process. On average, I would do this for 5 minutes about 5 times a week. This process allowed me to enjoy painting as a form of contemplation and relaxation rather than as a frustrating process of perfectionism." Grace continues, and this is one of her paintings from the course. Before this semester, I often found myself judging my work while I was creating. Aside from the times I worked into a flow state of mind in my art, I had a hard time staying in the present moment and allowing myself to relax and enjoy the process. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I worried too much about what others would think about my art and whether the majority of people would like it. My goal this semester was to change these habits. After reading articles such as The Art of Creativity, I realized that I've gotten away from what I believe to be true art, art that completes me as an artist. In The Art of Creativity, it talks about how children are so in the present when they create art. They simply enjoy it until the judgments of others cause them to be less confident and judge their work like many adults in our culture today. I wanted to get back to the stage where I didn't notice the judgmental opinions of others and simply did art for myself. So it's pretty wonderful, I think, to hear students start thinking again about what true art means to them, art that completes them. And here's another project by one of the students. Her daily practice was to read poetry every day, or nearly every day. And then she chose to work on what she called a slow art project, and this was an option for certain semesters. She took a project that was very, very ambitious, that you see pictured here, that she was unable to bring to fruition in another course because of the amount of time required and the sort of slow process that it required. What you're looking at is a sort of paper box with "You Always" cut out of it. And it appears to be a wind chime, but it's not an audio wind chime. It's actually a light wind chime. So when these sticks blow together, they actually create a circuit that lights up little LED lights that are inside of that paper box and then cast light on the sticks themselves. And this is what Stephanie Lewis, the artist pictured, wrote in her blog about her daily practice. Sometimes it took a lot of effort to focus on every meditation, but I think that struggle was good, and I think not letting myself give in to my desire to wander was an accomplishment itself. I've noticed myself applying these practices to other classes. I think being aware of our minds wandering is really an important tool. It sounds so simple, but how much harder is it to notice that your mind is straying and to just let it go? In classes, it has helped me focus. So we're going to pause here from the images for a few minutes and talk about the conversations that I have with students around questions of conscious choice, discipline, and intention. Ultimately, the students need to make their own decisions about how they want to practice and how often, and certainly it does not work for me to step in and police that process or try to monitor it for them closely, because that adds something that's really not necessary. And I think that's one of the paradoxes of being in a student-teacher relationship and yet giving them room to meet their resistance with daily practice. One thing that's clear is that none of them are interested in foregoing creativity in order to develop equanimity, but many of them are interested in finding a bridge between the two. Some grow very, very skilled at entering a mind-body state of uninhibited free association, and they capture that energy and material in order to fuel their practices. Through the conversations that we have and the studies that we make, the students grow to understand that how they practice becomes what they practice. And as Alan Watts says in his book, The Attention Revolution, what they pay attention to becomes who they are. What they pay attention to becomes who they are. The last curriculum strand that has sort of survived testing is documentation. Oftentimes paying attention to the thought stream and recording it in some artistic medium becomes a way to build consciousness of that thought stream. In other words, the active rendering it in some image or form using art media provides a path to developing spaciousness around the thought thought stream. Spaciousness, a concept that Kamachogan echoes in a radical work. So I think as students gain a kind of spaciousness around their thought stream, they often develop new perspectives or additional consciousness. And in this respect, I think the course empowers them. So what you see here are some images of work by Becca Smith. Becca's daily practice, which she had actually been doing for a number of years, was to write down her stream of thoughts in words in a little notebook. So for the class, she continued to do that, and then she decided that what she wanted to do was cast different parts of her body in plaster. So you see a head in the upper left-hand corner, you see the torso in the upper right, and then down below you can see that she's typed up the text from her notebook and started to write on the body. And here's a little reflection from Becca from her blog. I had this moment when I realized that I could change my own perceptions or come to new conclusions or make a statement out of what was once a completely isolated idea and alter how someone perceives me. Without a doubt, contemplative practice affected my creativity in the best sense. So I'd like to conclude with this idea of attentional dispositions. One of the things that I've discovered with the students is that as they mind their daily practices, or their daily lives for their practices, they discover that they have a certain attentional disposition. It's not fixed, it changes with context, it changes each moment to moment, and it's certainly a flexible range. However, there is a kind of disposition there. And one thing that I'm really interested in exploring further and talking with others about is how do we as educators best advocate for the time and space to offer courses where students discover and cultivate their own attentional dispositions. And then how do we evidence and expose the key role that sensitivity to and the cultivation of that attentional disposition plays in learning, in creativity, in rapport that's necessary to collaborate on complex problems, and that's necessary for empathy and compassion toward ourselves and our planet and toward each other. So that's how I'd like to conclude my talk. There are many people who have been supportive of this project. It's been a huge collaborative effort, and I could not have done it without many teams of many wonderful people. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne. It was wonderful to hear about that course. It seemed like it would be enticing to be part of the creative process as you framed it for your students. And wonderful to hear so much from them, too, about their reflections of their experience. It seems like really encouraged this self-awareness of them, of your students. So we're open with, we are close to 4 o'clock, but we can certainly take a little extra time since we started late to address some questions. If any of the attendees would like to raise a hand, I can see that Arhelia has a hand raised. We could try to bring her in. Or if any listeners have typed in questions. Let's see here. People asking for some of the resources, the books that you mentioned. I know you had mentioned one from Pema Chodron and Alan Watts. And generally when we archive the webinars and put them up on the association website, we'll post additional resources there. And so that's where you'll find any references that Anne has mentioned, and along with some links to the live video. I know we kind of dangled that possibility in front of you and then weren't able to fulfill it, so we can provide links to that when we archive the website. Let's see if I can bring Arhelia in here. Arhelia, are you there? Are you still listening? I can hear she would be coming in from Quintana Roo.
Wow.
Arhelia, did you have a question for Anne? she may have had to attend to something else. Let's see what else we have for typed in questions.
Yeah, if you can use the questions about that would be great.
Okay. So there's a question from Patricia. What is the objective of the walking blindfold exercise?
Oh, that's a good question. Thanks for that. The objective is that when students become blindfolded, and I should let you know that each one has a buddy next to them that has sight, they walk very, very slowly because they're no longer relying on their sight to make assumptions about things like even ground or a clear path. So their senses, such as hearing, sonar that we emit that we're not even aware of consciously, that bounces off objects and often keeps us from stumbling on something when we're walking through a dark room. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of almost walking into something and then stopping because you sense it's there. That's a kind of extraordinary attention to where you are in space, how you're moving, what's going on in your body-mind. And so one of the tricks of this, or I shouldn't say tricks, one of the challenges of this course is to help students who are incredibly distractible to slow down and actually be where they are. And the walking blindfolded really puts them into kind of extraordinary attention with multiple senses operating, and they find it really liberating. They take those blindfolds off and they just smile ear to ear. And usually they say, wow, that was amazing, or what a trip.
Wonderful.
Really different.
Okay, I see another question here, if you're ready for one. And this is from Laura Kaufman, and she's wondering how you came to practice contemplation. Was it through your walking practice in graduate school, or did you also begin a formal sitting practice?
I think it actually probably began very intuitively as a kid. I was given a lot of time to roam around outdoors in my neighborhood and in areas around our house and around the lake where we used to visit. When I was in high school, I discovered a book called Siddhartha that one of my older siblings, my brother and me, had bought from college. And that was definitely a milestone. I think my first formal sitting practice was while I was in undergraduate school. And then it progressed to various different practices throughout the years since then, including walking meditation.
Great, thank you. And we have a question from Brenda Miller who asks, she teaches creative writing, and she's wondering if you think some of the practices could translate into writing practices, if you imagine into that at all, or?
Absolutely. That's something that I really want to explore because, well, you know, there's that great book, I think it's called Writing Down the Bones. There's a great book. And there's several great writing books, and we read through a few of them, but careful observation is key to writing. And there's a small writing component to this video project that I would like to explore further, but I think many of the exercises we go through to put people in that observant frame of mind would translate beautifully into writing, and have as they've written about what they videotape. I think that's something that's ripe for development.
Yeah, it does seem very suggestive. And I think we have time probably for one or two more. Pamela Warner asks, what criteria do you use to grade such a delicate process? Just has a hard time, conflating the process you're describing with the demands of academic evaluation.
Yeah, right. There are several different things. They have several ways to opt into earning credit toward an A. One is that they can volunteer to develop an exercise, and they have to develop a proposal, a very detailed proposal about what they want to do, what their objectives are, what the criteria for evaluation of the success of the exercise will be, and they have to test it out with me. So that's one way they can earn credit toward getting a high grade. And, you know, the evaluation criteria are, did they meet their objectives, were they clear in how they made their presentation, and things like that that relate to the reading material that they propose. I had a wonderful suggestion from David Haskell at the Clifton Retreat last summer, or a couple of summers ago, and he talked about having them write a final journal entry. So they write these blogs weekly, but then they use them to write a final summary of their experience, and they understand that the sort of specificity and clarity with which they relate their narrative from beginning to end of the semester will help me understand their experience very clearly. And that the more examples that they can provide of realizations, whether the realizations are what they consider a good, unquote, a good experience or a bad experience or a failure, it's all part of it. The ability to articulate their experience in detail, which evidences the commitment to which they've applied themselves, their commitment to their practice, also helps me grade them. And then I also look at their projects. Those are a few of the ways that I've graded. I've considered making a Pascal class.
Yeah, there would be a certain freedom in that, but it sounds like it's helpful to define the criteria with them and then be able to see how closely they can match that. Okay, we have time for one final question, and then I will announce our next webinar and say farewell for the afternoon. But Rob Kaplan asks, could you speak a little about how you help custom design a daily or almost daily practice for your students?
Well, they come up with it. I'm coaching. They read The Art of Creativity. They read the article, Is Buddhism Good for You? They read a few articles that list different techniques and mindsets and attitudes that fuel eureka moments and moments of being present, ways to get into the quote-unquote right brain, which is an oversimplification. And then I ask them to, for a week, pay really careful attention to what they do each day and to think of their daily life in sort of topographical terms and sort of be on the lookout for something that sort of rises as a peak or has some particular feature. Maybe it's a valley, maybe it's a wall, that they think they would like to pay more attention to. And then they brainstorm around it, and they pretty much come up with their own ideas. Some of them look to more traditional practices, like Grace, who enjoyed walking meditation. She looked at that, and then she looked at her block with painting, and she sort of put the two together and decided that painting, but without having the pressure of making a product, would be a good solution. So it's, I have tea with them. I invite them to come to a tea house, and we talk about what they want to do. And we refer to readings and traditions that they've become familiar with in the first few weeks of class.
Thanks so much, Anne. And there was a final comment just from Patricia Turnbull, who says, through this webinar, she's made a compassionate reconnection to Syracuse University. So another way that that these are an opportunity to connect with each other. Thank you so much, Anne. And as we look forward to the May webinar, I just want to make sure you know about it. On May 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be presenting No Time to Think, the American University and its or maybe both anti-contemplative and contemplative roots, from David Levy, who is Professor of Information School at the University of Washington. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon, and wishing you all well. Bye for now.